Hello everyone, I'm currently in Michigan, visiting some close relatives. Before coming here, I had some good ideas for a Dogman story upload, so I was able to get in contact with some people from Reddit and off Facebook, asking if they would like to share any stories regarding the Michigan Dogman. I managed to get 5 stories, but I have to warn you, it's pretty chilling and fucked up. With that being said, I hope that you enjoy. This story comes from a woman on Reddit telling her story about how her friend went missing and disappeared playing in the Michigan woods. When I was just 10, I had a friend named Sarah, and together we spent countless hours exploring the woods near our homes. But one day at around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I think, our game of hide and seek we played many times would lead to a terrifying encounter that would haunt me for the rest of my days. When Sarah and I ventured into the woods, our laughter echoing through the trees as we raced deeper into the wilderness. We were so caught up in our game that we didn't realize just how far we had strayed from the safety of the familiar paths. As I counted to 10, Sarah darted off into the underbrush, her giggles fading into the distance. But when I reached the count of 10 and set off in search of her, I quickly realized that she was nowhere to be found. Panic gripped my heart as I called out her name, my voice lost in the vast expanse of the forest. I searched frantically for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my chest as fear clawed at my insides. But despite my efforts, there was no sign of Sarah, and I soon found myself hopelessly lost in the tangled maze of trees. Exhausted and afraid, I eventually succumbed to sleep, my dreams haunted by visions of my missing friend. When I awoke, the forest was bathed in the soft light of dawn, but the peace was shattered by the frantic shouts of my parents and Sarah's family searching for us. I stumbled towards the sound of their voices, tears streaming down my cheeks as I recounted the events of the previous day. But it was the whispered mention of the Dogman that sent shivers down my spine, filling me with a sense of dread, unlike anything I had ever known. The police arrived soon after, their grim faces betraying the seriousness of the situation. They searched the woods with a fine-tooth comb, but there was no sign of Sarah, save for the unrecognizable tracks that marred the forest floor. To this day, I still wonder what became of my dear friend, lost to the depths of the forest and the sinister creature that lurks within. And though I may never know the truth, the memory of that day will forever haunt me, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the Michigan woods. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, my uncle and I set out on our fishing trip near the secluded riverbanks of Michigan. The air was crisp with the promise of twilight, and I couldn't shake the feeling of excitement coursing through my veins as we made our way down the winding trail. But as we walked, I couldn't help but notice the unease that seemed to settle over my uncle like a dark cloud. He glanced around nervously, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow as if expecting something to leap out at us from the depths of the woods. "Uncle, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice tinged with concern. He paused, his gaze fixed on a cluster of trees just ahead, before shaking his head and muttering something about being cautious in unfamiliar territory. But I could sense that there was more to his paranoia than he was letting on, and a chill ran down my spine as we continued on our journey. Halfway down the trail, my uncle suddenly stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he peered into the darkness of the forest beyond. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, unmoving, his senses on high alert until, finally, he gave a curt nod and motioned for us to continue. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me as we pushed forward, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end with each passing moment. But I pushed aside my fears, chalking it up to my imagination running wild in the unfamiliar surroundings. As we set out in our canoe, the gentle lapping of the water against the hull soothing my frayed nerves, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And when I followed my uncle's gaze to the shadowy depths of the woods, my heart skipped a beat at the sight of two pointy ears peeking out from behind a tangle of underbrush. But I brushed aside my concerns, convincing myself that it was nothing more than a trick of the light or a harmless woodland creature. That is, until my uncle began to regale me with tales of the Michigan Dogman, his voice low and filled with dread as he spoke of the creature's insatiable hunger for human flesh. As darkness fell and we made our way back to the safety of the RV, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that hung heavy in the air. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder if we were truly alone in the woods, or if something more sinister lurked just beyond the trees, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting prey. I got in contact with former police officer Johnson. I met off Facebook. He was an officer living in Michigan for the last 20 years. This is his Dogman story. Officer Johnson was no stranger to the eerie silence that hung over the lakeshore at dusk. It was his duty to patrol the area, ensuring that the secluded spot, known for teenage parties and late-night rendezvous, remained clear of troublemakers. But on this particular evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Johnson would encounter something far more sinister than rowdy teens. As he parked his patrol car near the edge of the lake, his gaze swept over the familiar landscape, searching for any signs of activity. It was then that he spotted them. 4 dark shapes huddled by the water's edge, their forms obscured by the fading light. Curiosity piqued, Johnson stepped out of his car and approached cautiously, his hand resting on the handle of his holster. As he drew closer, the shapes began to take form, and a chill ran down his spine at the sight that greeted him. Standing before him were creatures straight out of his worst nightmares, dog-like in appearance, but with a sinister intelligence gleaming in their eyes. Johnson's heart hammered in his chest as he struggled to make sense of what he was seeing. Without hesitation, he retreated to his car and radioed for backup, his voice trembling with fear as he relayed the situation to his fellow officers. But by the time help arrived, the creatures were nowhere to be found, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of dread and disbelief. In the days that followed, Johnson's encounter would become the talk of the town, fueling rumors of a monstrous presence lurking in the shadows of the lakeshore. And though he tried to convince himself that it was nothing more than a trick of the light or a figment of his imagination, deep down, he knew that what he had witnessed that fateful evening was all too real. This story comes from a woman I met on Facebook, who is known around the Michigan area. She told me she lived on the outskirts of Michigan, which wasn't too far from where my family lives. So I took it upon myself to visit her personally. It was only an hour drive to her house, which was fine. As I sat across from Ruthie Rose in her quaint living room, the crackling fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me like a heavy blanket. Ruthie was a woman of strong convictions and unwavering skepticism, had called me here to discuss a matter that had haunted her for 15 long years. A chilling encounter with the Michigan Dogman. Her husband, a fervent believer in the existence of the creature, had spent years chasing elusive shadows and setting traps in the hopes of capturing proof of its existence. But Ruthie had always dismissed his obsession as nothing more than a desperate attempt to gain notoriety in a world that had long forgotten him. However, on that fateful night of December 20th, everything changed. The air was thick with anticipation as Ruthie recounted the events that had unfolded. A trap her husband set deep in the woods went off, she said. Her husband damn near leapt out of her chair and nearly tore through the door, sprinting outside. She followed right behind him. As they made the way half through the woods, she stopped in her tracks of what she saw. It was a Dogman-like creature, with his head damn near all the way inside of the trip that was hanging on top of the tree. She said, "My husband took aim and point-blank shot this thing in the head. The cry that this thing let out was ungodly. When it finally went limp, I thought he was going to call the police or something, but instead, he decided to drag it all the way back to our house and into his basement so that he can study it." I looked at him like he was fucking crazy. "Are you fucking serious?" I told him. He ignored me while he drags this dead thing all the way back to our home. Our fucking home. At this point, I could tell she was building up with anger and disbelief. For months he was down in that fucking basement all day every day, and the smell was ungodly whenever I went to check on him. And as always, he ignored me. It's like he started caring more about that dead thing more than he cared about me anymore. When the whole story was over, with my now trembling hands and a heart filled with dread, she stood up, and I followed Ruthie into the backyard, where she instructed me to dig in the center of the yard. As I plunged the shovel into the earth, my mind raced with doubts and fears, but I pushed them aside, determined to uncover the truth. Minutes turned into hours as I dug deeper and deeper, the soil yielding reluctantly to my efforts. And then, at last, I saw it. A large bone protruding from the ground, its weathered surface a testament to the passage of time. As I continued to dig, my heart pounding in my chest, the truth began to dawn on me with chilling clarity. This was no ordinary bone. It was the skeletal remains of a creature long thought to be nothing more than a myth, a legend talked about for centuries. With a sense of dread creeping over me, I stumbled out of the hole, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had uncovered. Ruthie's eyes met mine, their depths filled with a mixture of sorrow and resignation, and I knew then that her story was far from over. There was more to the whole story untold, for in that moment, as the truth lay bare before us, I realized that the Michigan Dogman was not just a legend. It was a living, breathing nightmare that lurked in the shadows of the woods. And as I looked into Ruthie's eyes, I knew that the horrors would not only haunt her again, but newer ones would now haunt me for days.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.